Section 8 of the Rover, Volume 1, Number 5. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Aidan Fitzgerald. The Rover, Volume 1, Number 5. Edited by Seba Smith and Lawrence Labree. Section 8, Lacy de Vere. Doomed to be the last leaf, which by heaven's decree must hang upon a blasted tree. Wordsworth. The founder of the family of the De Veres came over with the first William, but not as an adventurer allured by the prospect of gain and the hope of acquiring titular distinction, for the insignia of knighthood had already been bestowed upon him in his own land. When, however, the conquest rendered it alike the duty and policy of William to attach his Norman followers to his person, Rupert de Vere was one of the first who received solid proofs of that monarch's favor. Generation followed generation, king after king succeeded to the throne. Centuries of change, romance and tragedy fulfilled their checkered fate. And in the history of all, the De Veres were eminently conspicuous. But time that lifts the low and level lays the lofty brow began at length to exercise an evil influence on the fortune of the house, and toward the middle of the 15th century, Hugh, the then Baron de Vere, had little to transmit to his children, beyond the name and the noble nature of his ancestors. Instead of the broad manors and princely dwellings once connected with the title, he found himself reduced to a single castle, situated on the sea-coast in the north of England, one that in the proud days of the family had been erected as a mere hold for the protection of the northern vessels from the insurrections of the Scottish borders. At the period in question, the War of the Roses, those suicidal wars of the same people, were at their height. Every county became in turn a field of battle, till the whole kingdom was saturated with the blood of its habitants. The ties of neighborhood, even of kindred, were dissolved. Inhabitants of the same village, members of one household, separated only to meet again in the hatred and bloodthirstiness, only to reunite in the fierce onset of battle. Neighbors as strangers, friends as rivals, children of one mother as sworn foes. Though it was in consequence of these wars that the family of the De Veres became extinct. From one sorrow and one disgrace they were free. They neither espoused the cause of rebellion, nor were they divided among themselves. At the first raising of King Henry's standard, the old baron braced on his armor, and if owing to the changed fortunes of his house, many went forth to the service of that monarch with a larger train of vessels, not one, whether prince or knight, could compete with Hugh de Vere in the value of his offering. He brought with him 6 brave sons, devoted to him and to each other, the pillars of his house, the guardians of his age. Even the youngest, the fair stripling Lacy, girt with the sword which his father, when himself a youth, had wielded at Agincourt. He too was there, stately in step and bold of heart, as the mailed man of 100 battles. That was neither a time nor a court calculated to encourage tenderness of heart, and she, the guiding spirit of both, was little subject to its influence. Yet, as the baron presented his sons, each after each according to his age, an expression of sorrow passed for an instant over the countenance of Queen Margaret. When Lacy stepped from the circle and kneeled down, "Nay, nay, my lord," she said hastily, "leave the boy behind. Why expose a life that can benefit neither friend nor foe? Rise, rise, poor child. What canst thou do for us?" "I can die." said the noble boy, with a passionate enthusiasm that thrilled his father's heart with mingled pride and sorrow. "Well said," replied the queen, fixing her cold, proud eye on Lacy's countenance, yet glowing with emotion. He understood its meaning, and returned the searching glance with something like an expression of indignant defiance. "I perceive he is a de Vere," said the queen, turning to the old baron, for whom the compliment and its accompanying smile were intended. "But where is poor Blanche?" continued she, addressing Lacy. "If thou hast left her in the north, she too may need a knight's protection. Thou art a brave spirit, but dost thou well to leave her in charge of hirelings? For her sake, for thine own, peril not thy youth and our cause. Lord Hugh, command him back to thy castle. If Warwick keep court in the north, he may chance to see fighting even there." This was no common strain with Margaret of Anjou, but her own princely boy, the magnanimous, ill-fated Edward, stood beside her, and the woman and the mother triumphed for an instant over the imperious and dark-minded queen. "Craving your grace's favour," said Lacy in a determined tone, before his father had time to reply. "Were Blanche my wife instead of my sister, I would neither live nor die like a bird in a cage. When the arrow finds me," and the boy pointed as he spoke to his device, a falcon in full flight, "it shall be thus, free and fearless." No farther expostulation or entreaty was attempted. Lacy accompanied his father and brothers, and ere time had written manhood on his brow. He had borne his part in many a well-fought field. The various changes in the royal fortunes are, however, too well known to require enumeration here. Indeed, except as connected with the fortunes of Lacy de Vere, they are irrelevant. On him and his they told so soon and so fatally, that at the period to which this legend is supposed to refer, he was no longer the fair stripling who had vowed to die before he well knew the nature of death. The years that had elapsed since then were, it is true, few in number, but they had been years of strife and storm, crowded with fearful alternations of victory and defeat, flight and pursuit, alike grievous and unavailing. The great struggle was yet undecided. Lacy de Vere was still a youth warrior, but oh, how changed, how careworn! The bloom had forsaken his cheek, buoyancy had left his spirit. Prompt in fight and cool in counsel, he played his part in the desperate game like one to whom life and death, success and failure, were alike uncertain and indifferent, and to him all things else were changed. He no longer rode forth encouraged by the presence of his father and 5 brave brothers. One by one that little company was cut off. Each after each, in the order of birth, fell by his side, and he, the youngest of his father's house, became its head, the sole heir of a race of heroes, the last Baron de Vere. It was the Battle of Taunton which invested Lacy with these melancholy honours, and rendered him at the same time a fugitive. For that battle, so sanguinary in itself, was fatal to the Queen and her adherents. Stung to madness by the death of his latest surviving brother, and the utter ruin of that cause, in defiance of which all that was dear to him had perished, the words of Margaret, the tears of Blanche, rushed upon his memory. That tie of kindred which he once so lightly esteemed, now that it was the only one remaining, assumed its rightful sway over his wounded spirit. He found that the relative love which God hath planted in the human heart, however it may be outraged for a time by stoicism, by worldly wisdom, or worldly glory, will return to the proudest bosom in the dark day of adversity. Lacy de Vere was once in the delirium of martial pride, scorned his home, and deserted her who, as the offspring of the same birth, was bound to him by more than common sisterhood, now flung down the insignia of his rank and bearing, and fled from the field of battle. True to that instinct which governs all men in their misfortunes, he fled toward his long-deserted home, and he found it, as his fears had well predicted, desolate and in ruins. One horrible peculiarity in the present contest was the license assumed by both parties to devastate whatever part of the country they passed through, whether hostile or friendly to their interests. Even those engaged in the same cause were not always safe from each other. Many an old feud was avenged, many a rival removed, or his property destroyed, apparently by some excess on the part of the troops, but frequently at the command of their more interested leaders. The devastation which had been wrought in the present instance seemed more than the result of destroyers animated by merely general motives. There appeared to have been a guided spirit at work. There did not remain sufficient building to shelter a beggar from the storm, not a tree, not a shrub, but was cut down or mutilated. The grass and corn had been consumed with fire as they stood. Even paltry hovels, which sheltered the domestic laborers, were leveled with the earth. All was destroyed without distinction or remorse, destroyed in the spirit of hatred. Lacy de Vere walked around the remains of this, the last hold of his race, and in the anguish of a noble spirit, brought low by self-reproach, he rejoiced that his father and brothers were in the grave. But when he had reached a spot which had once been a little herb garden, carefully walled round, now open on all sides, and choked with the drifted sea sand, rage and grief overcame him. He could no longer refrain from the expression of his inward emotions. "Yes," said he with a bitter smile, "yes, an enemy hath done this, but no enemy of King Henry and his cause. It was no Robin of Redesdale with his marauders, no vindictive Warwick, no savage borderers. My enemy, the enemy of my house, Lionel Wethamstead. Thou'st did this evil. Assassin serpent, twice I spared thee in battle, and twice didst thou ride off bidding me seek my flourishing home and fair sister. Blind fool to cherish a tiger till it longed for its keeper's blood. Lionel Withamstead," continued the speaker more vehemently, while his whole frame was tremulous with passion, "didst thou slaughter the lamb in the fold? Was the bird crushed in the nest? O Lionel, if thou didst spare Blanche in the day of destruction, all were thy sins thousandfold shall be forgiven. If Blanche lives, if thou hadst spared her, I, even I, thine enemy, will bless thee." Lacy was too engrossed by his emotions to be aware that he was watched, or even observed, by a boy couched among the rubbish. At first glance, the intruder appeared nothing more than a young peasant, worn with fright and famine. But upon a second view, his attire, coarse as it were, could not disguise the natural grace of the wearer, nor even the dark cloth bonnet, though only of the kind worn by menials, gave a sordid expression to the noble countenance which it shaded. Hitherto he had remained perfectly quiet, eyeing Lacy with mingled anxiety and interest. But when the last words of the young knight's passionate invocation died upon the air, he rose from his hiding-place with a slow and stately step, and addressed him in a tone that struck like the east wind to the listener's heart, a tone of reproach, if aught so sweet could be said to convey reproach, of affection and deep sorrow. "And where wert thou, Lacy de Vere, when the spoiler stole upon thy heritage?
Where was thy care when she for whom thou mourn'st prayed thee by that mystery of love which unites those born in the same hour, to stay and shield her from treachery and violence? And didst thou spare Lionel Withamstead? Look to it, for of a truth in the day of his power not so will he spare thee. Look to it, for he hath vowed vengeance against all who bear thy name, and all who call thee master. But few, few are those. He hath begun his work well. Think ye not he will finish? When thou wert young, thou hatedst him, for the lying lip and craven spirit are hateful to the brave and true. But he saw it, he withered in the scornful glances of thy dark eye. And he swore to have vengeance, slow, secret, but sure vengeance on thee and thine. He hath it, groaned Lacy. He hath it to the last drop of bitterness. He hath it not, resumed the boy solemnly. Dost not thou the offender live? And she who spurned him as a reptile when he proffered her safety in his hand. Look to it, last of a lordly race, spare him not the third time. He hath laid thy dwelling in the dust. Those who were hirelings he corrupted, those who were faithful he slew, and she who was born to mate with princes fled for her life to the dark and noisome cavern of the rock. Yet is the work of vengeance incomplete. Weep on, Lacy de Vere, continued the mysterious speaker, after a pause only interrupted by the Baron's convulsive sobs. Though thou art a warrior, weep on. What knowest thou of grief? It hath come to thee in its royal robes, amid sounding trumpets and gorgeous banners, and the shout of victory, and the presence of mighty warriors. But grief hath come to me in lowlier guise, in darkness and cold, and neglect, and hunger, and sickness of heart, and loneliness of the grave. And I shall weep no more, unless perchance for thee. Curse me, Blanche, said Lacy vehemently, for his heart told him that she herself was by his side. I can bear all things now. I have found thee. And saying this, he drew her to his bosom, and wept over her like a child. Further details of the conversation which ensued on the reunion of those who had been so long been lost to each other are needless. Love is a child that sparks in broken words. It is easy to conceive of the self-reproaches uttered by Lacy, and the sweet forgiveness and consolation spoken by Blanche. Of the anxious question and fond reply, their mutual mourning over the past, and mutual cares for the future, both softened by the reflection that, come weal, come woe, the bound of affection would never be more divided. They needed neither vow nor witness, yet there, amid the ruins of that home, which had sheltered them throughout a happy childhood, on the hearthstone round which for centuries their ancestors had gathered, the twins, the last of their race, knelt down and vowed to separate no more, but to have living or dying one home, one grave, and they called upon the spirits of their father and brethren, whose bones lay bleaching on many a field of battle, to witness and sanctify their vow. They arose, homeless and friendless. Nevertheless, they arose comforted, for that love, which neither change nor sorrow can lastingly embitter or absorb, again triumphed in the soul of each. The refuge which Blanche had found for herself on the destruction of her home and the death or flight of those left to guard it was too fearful a spot to have been selected by one less courageous or under circumstances less appalling. A line of rock extended along the seashore for about the space of half a mile, gradually rising from one extremity and as gradually declining to the other. It appeared one vast parapet, a continued range of stone battlements, erected by nature, at once to overlook and brave the ocean beneath. The front was as completely perpendicular as if hewn by the hammer and the chisel, while lichens, mosses, ivory of every variety of graceful creeping shrub overspread its surface, as though trained there by the hand of man. It was wonderful to view what seemed a gigantic wall of cold, hard stone, thus magnificently embroidered with the foliage of earth, while here and there messes of orrery and weather-strained rock showed like ruined castles amid the clinging greenery. Nearly at the summit of the highest point, inaccessible as it would seem except to the sea-bird and the goat, was a natural arch, scooped out of the rock and opening into a cavern. The ivy spread around that arch with peculiar beauty. Adjacent parts of the rock brightened in the beam of morning or in the moonlight, but the cavern always retained the same aspect, dark, noisome, unearthly. This was Blanche's refuge, the dwelling place of her who had been delicately reared, been befitted the only daughter of a noble house. Lacy was mute with surprise and terror when he first saw her ascend what appeared to him as inaccessible to the foot as any castle wall. There were, however, though he perceived them not, inequalities on the surface, and now clinging to a brush, now grasping a root of ivory, her nailed peasant's shoes tinkling at every step against the stony path, her slight figure alternately hidden and revealed amongst the shrubs. Blanche, to whom habit had familiarized the perilous ascent, reached the cavern, but as she stood in the dark entrance, the moonlight glimmering on her countenance, and her voice coming down from the vast height a mere filament of sound, Lacy could have believed her a creature of another world and species. She was not, however, companionless in this aerial home. The goats often repaired thither to rest. The sea-bird there deposited her eggs, and to them she had frequently been indebted for sustenance, when the rock and the shore failed to afford their natural tribute of berries and shellfish. Necessity, that teacher sterner and more efficient even than duty, soon accustomed Lacy to the difficult ascent and rude hiding-place. He had been too familiar with hardship and sorrow to mourn over outward privations, and ere long he loved that dim retreat, hallowed as it was by repose and safety, and cheered by the presence of her who was not only his sister, but his best and only friend. The desires which once consumed his spirit were extinguished. The vain strife, and the yet vainer joys and ambitions of the world no longer occupied his mind. Revenge and all ferocious thoughts were dead. He could remember his enemies, aye, even Lionel Withamstead, in peace, and when he walked among the neighbouring herdsmen, lowlier in lot than themselves, or stood in the opening of his mountain hold, and looked on the ocean roaring beneath, or the host of heaven shining quietly above, Lacy de Vere forgot the past, and calling his sister to his side, pronounced himself a happy man. But this retreat, this respite from misfortune, was not destined to remain long undiscovered. The Battle of Taunton had, it is true, placed Edward, Duke of York, on the throne, and wholly destroyed or scattered the adherents of Queen Margaret. But that remorseless prince, deeming his power only to be secured by continued bloodshed, still allowed his followers to ravish the north, as having been the stronghold of the Lancastrian cause. Among the most active in this murderous employment was Lionel Withamstead. He knew that Lacy de Vere yet lived, concealed, as he had reason to suspect, in the neighbourhood of his former dwelling. Except as affording means of gaining fortune and distinction, the cause of King Edward or Queen Margaret were alike indifferent to him. It was personal hatred which induced him to hunt out the Lancastrians with such relentless zeal. The desire to discover and exterminate the last of that family, whose protection he had so long enjoyed, and cruelly requited. During childhood and youth he had been a favorite with the old Baron de Vere, and as such allowed to be intimate with the castle. Before him he had masked, under the show of humility and devoted zeal, the designing, treacherous spirit which crouches that it may be more securely spring at its prey, and lays in servile submission the foundation of despotic power. The young Lacy, bold and open as became his birth, instinctively scorned the minion, even before he discovered how well that scorn was merited. Many a proud glance and bitter taunt were bestowed by the fearless youth, little dreaming that of which, however, unnoticed at the time, Lionel kept a too faithful record, and would one day claim for them a deadly recompense. And now that day was near at hand. Hatred, once formed in the heart, turns neither to the right hand nor the left till its work is done. Love, even the love of a mother for her babe, may be diverted. Grief, though of a father for his firstborn be forgotten, gratitude may pass like the morning dew, and pity as a noonday cloud. Hatred alone can survive all change, all time, all circumstance. All other emotions, nay. It can survive the accomplishment of revenge, and like the vampire, prey on its dead victim. "I know not," said Lacy, as he and Blanche stood together one evening in the archway of their cavern. "I know not why, when all around me is so fair, sadness and forebodings of coming evil should hang so heavily on my heart." "Nay, nay, dear Lacy," replied Blanche. "Look at our castle, which will resist both fire and violence. Our faithful rock, with all its luxuriant grandeur, flashing in the light of that departing sun. What should we fear? Art thou weary of repose, Lacy, or dost thou mistrust thy warder?" continued she with affectionate playfulness, at the same instant placing her arm around his. But the cloud passed not from her brother's brow, and he replied in a low, broken voice men use when troubled in spirit. "I tell thee, Blanche, nay, count not my words idle, for an influence is on me which I can neither gainsay nor resist. I tell thee, evil hangs over us, my end is near. Twice I spared Lionel Wethamstead, and twice since the last going down of yonder sun have I beheld myself in his power. Oh, it was a dark vision, a dream more fearful than a field of battle." "Dreams, Lacy, visions, what of them? When I dwelt here alone, oh, how often did I see thee prisoner, wounded, dying, dead! I too had dreams and visions, yet they came not true. Why then should thine?" Lacy made no reply to this inquiry, for he heard it not, and when he again spoke, his words were but the expression of the melancholy reverie into which he had fallen. Yes, it was down there, stealing along the foot of the rock, half hidden by the trees and underwood, Lionel and his black band, 6 blackened spirits as in outward guise, not one ever known to strike twice or to spare. I knew them all, and why they came. "Lacy, Baron de Vere!" exclaimed Blanche, shaking his arm, which she held with her utmost strength. "Rouse from this unmanly mood. Let the babe and the peasant stare at shadows. But thou, I pray thee, let me not have to blush for him whom I ought to honour." "And whom thou wilt ere long weep," replied Lacy in an unaltered voice. "Blanche de Vere, misjudge me not. I spoke neither of flight nor fear, nor supplication for life, nor aught that may disgrace a warrior. I did not but speak of death. Death that were welcome, if it came only to myself, but my sister, dearer than all the kindred I have lost, or all now living, my last friend, death, is on its way to thee too." "It will not be death if shared with thee," replied Blanche fervently. "Death would be to live when thou art gone. I did thee wrong, noble, generous brother. Forgive it." And she sat down at his feet and covered her face with her hands. "Glorious orb," said Lacy, after having for some minutes earnestly regarded the sun, which was now slowly descending into the ocean with more than meridian pump. "Unchanged, unchangeable, bright at thy setting as on thy first rising. Most glorious orb, farewell. And thou to earth, steeping in the tears and blood of thy children, polluted with crime, groaning with sorrow, yet withal so beauteously apparelled. Many graves hast thou afforded my father's house. Spare it yet another, the last, and now," said he, the steady solemn tone in which he had hitherto spoke changing to one of indignant defiance, while a change as complete overspread his countenance. "Now, even now that grave is needed, the appointed hour is arrived. Yonder the murderers come, black and silent as in the vision, but the last de Vere dies not like a reptile, driven into its hold and crushed in darkness. The doom that is decreed shall be met. Rise, Blanche, sister by birth, companion in sorrow, daughter of heroes, arise, and let us descend. Let not Lionel have to glory in our shame. Haste, haste! I see his black plume waving to and fro. His spear glitters through the trees, nearer, brighter every instant." "I am ready, ready to endure all," said Blanche firmly. "But oh, let not Lionel see our parting anguish. Bless me for the last time here." And she laid her head upon her brother's bosom. They stood regarding each other, speechless and in tears. To part was harder than to die. Lacy's vision of forebodings were indeed on the point of being realized. The implacable Lionel had learned but too surely their place of retreat, and but too truly was he with his ruffians, winding along the foot of the rock. Even now they were within view of the cavern, in the opening which stood that devoted pair, whose doom was sealed before they knew it. A shout of brutal triumph suddenly arose from Lionel and his band, as they halted when sufficiently near the spot. At the same instant 2 picked archers obeyed their leader's command with murderous precision, and ere the defenceless victims could look round or utter a cry, the arrows pierced them, clasped as they were in each other's arms. One of the shafts had entered Lacy's heart, and in the twinkling of an eye, without a word or a groan, he was numbered with the dead. For an instant, a single instant, his dying eyes were turned upon his fellow victim, and at that glance, though transient as the flash of lightning, revealed love stronger than death, love that would exist beyond the grave. The wound received by Blanche, though mortal, was not calculated to occasion instant death, and nobly did she employ the precious respite. "My brother shall not become a prey to the birds of the air," were her first words on perceiving that he was indeed dead, and with an energy scarcely human, she prepared for her labor of love. Habit had, it is true, rendered the ascent and descent of that rock so easy that in the darkest night she would scarcely have missed her footing. But wounded as she was at present, her intention to descend and convey with her Lacy's yet warm and bleeding body appeared impracticable. Love, however, enabled her to execute what love had induced her to determine. Carefully wrapping the corse in every garment she could afford from herself, to defend it in some measure from the sharp points of the rock, she partly drew and partly bore the precious burden down a pathway which to any but herself would under such circumstances have surely been fatal. She felt neither fatigue nor pain. She heeded not that every stone and step in her descent was sprinkled with her own blood. Her sole care was to shield the senseless body in her arms from wounds and injury. Heaven in pity strengthened her for the task, and she reached the ground in safety, her labor accomplished, her reward obtained. Those who had come out against the noble pair gathered round them in silence, some in truth touched by the exhibition of love, passing even the love of women. She unfolded the coverings from the body, which was now becoming cold and stiff. Then looking upon the armed circle, she fixed her eye on him, the evil spirit whose ministers they were, and addressed him like one gifted with unearthly authority. "Lionel, thy work is finished. Thou wert the nursling of our house, and hast become its destroyer. Thou hast rendered bitter for sweet, evil for good, and injuries for benefits. Thou hast brought low the old, the honorable, the young, the brave, the virtuous, and hitherto none hath stayed thy hand. But come near, Lionel Withamstead, and I will advise thee of things that shall befall thee yet. By day thou shalt dread treachery, and by night dream visions of horror. Thou shalt flee when none pursue, and be afraid where no fear is. Thou hast built thy fortunes in thy master's blood. Some around thee shall build theirs and thine. As thou hast hated, so shall others hate thee. Scorn and sorrow and affliction and want, every evil thou hast wrought on us, cleave fourfold, and forever to thee and thine. Yea, cleave as the flesh cleaveth to the bone. Ay, go thy way, man of blood. Brace thy helmet and mount thy steed. Thou mayest escape me now, but I shall see thee again, where neither horse nor armor shall avail thee, before God, who will condemn the murderer in the face of heaven. In the day of judgment, Lionel Withamstead, thou shalt meet me there." She ceased. The livid paleness and the damps of death had gradually gathered on her countenance. Every sentence had been uttered in mortal anguish. Nevertheless, she had maintained throughout the cold, calm bearing of one already separated from the body. The wretch to whom her words had been addressed shivered under their influence, as though exposed to an icy blast. Superstitious horror mastered the ferocious spirit, till then scarcely satisfied with its revenge, and setting spurs to his horse, he departed from the spot like one pursued by an evil spirit. "Let those who shot the arrows complete their work," said the dying maiden to the men, who remained fixed to the spot, subdued by some supernatural agency, and scarcely conscious of their leader's departure. "Let them wrap us in one shroud, and bury us in the same grave." One of the archers stepped forward. He was rude, even savage in his exterior, but nature was not utterly extinct. He kneeled down beside the dying and the dead, and swore to observe the request. "Thy victim blesses thee," replied Blanche. "Farewell." She spoke no more, for death claimed her conquest. She stretched herself on the ground beside him, whom in life she had loved so well, whom dying she could not forget. Placing one arm beneath his head, and the other across his bosom, so that her cheek rested against his, she meekly closed her eyes like a withered child that slept on its mother's lap. Thus died Lacy and Blanche de Vere, twins in birth, and twins also in the manner of their death. They slept not as their fathers before them, in marble monuments adorned with stately devices. They were laid in the peasant's grave, beneath the green and trodden turf, with no record more lasting than its bright but perishable flowers. There was none to mourn over them, none to have them in remembrance, none to perpetuate their name. When they died together, and with them the memory of a noble race passed forever from the earth. So fails, so languishes, grows dim and dies, all that this world is proud of. End of Section 8. Recording by Aidan Fitzgerald.